The man on the phone thought he had me. I could hear it in his voice, that special confidence that comes when a predator thinks he has found easy prey. He called himself Agent Harmon. He said he was from the Social Security Administration. He said my retirement accounts had been flagged for suspicious activity and that I needed to act fast to save my money. Have you received such calls before? Tell me how you handled it. I let out a small, shaky breath into the phone. I made my voice go thin and frightened. Oh my goodness, how much time do I have? I was not frightened. Not even slightly. I recognized his script inside the first 20 seconds. I had seen it written up in 17 different Federal Trade Commission bulletins. The fake urgency. The authority costume. The carefully placed silences designed to let fear grow. It was a solid script. Whoever trained him had done their homework. But here is the thing about scripts. The person reading it always knows less than the person who wrote it. And I had spent 31 years being the person who wrote things nobody else was supposed to understand. While Agent Harmon talked, I quietly pulled my laptop closer. My fingers found the keyboard without looking, the way a musician finds piano keys in the dark. I opened a program, checked a setting, and smiled to myself. My name is Alex Harlow. I am 62 years old. I have a vegetable garden that Nora says is getting out of control, and a home office she calls the bunker, and 14 months of retirement sitting behind me like a long, quiet hallway I have been slowly learning to walk through. Before all of that, I was a lead cybersecurity engineer for the Department of Defense for 31 years. Agent Harmon had absolutely no idea. I need you to stay calm and follow my instructions exactly, he said. Can you do that for me? I looked at my screen. The trace was already running. Yes, I said softly. Please help me. I don't know what to do. I knew exactly what to do. Before I tell you what happened next, I need to take you back. Not to brag. The work I did for 31 years was designed to be invisible, and so were the people doing it. I am telling you this because what comes next only makes sense if you understand what I spent my life building. I joined the Department of Defense at 29. My first assignment was building intrusion detection systems for military communication networks. Systems that watch for enemy activity the way a guard dog watches a fence, except instead of barking, they record every single thing that tries to get through. I was not naturally gifted. I had a supervisor named Caldwell who made me rebuild a flawed architecture 3 times before he accepted it. But I learned the way you learn when the cost of being wrong is larger than your career. By 40, I was leading a red team, the group whose job is to attack their own organization's systems before a real enemy can. We were the good guys pretending to be the bad guys so the good guys could get better. By my early 50s, I was leading 12 engineers protecting national grid infrastructure from state-sponsored cyber attacks. The enemies we faced were not kids in basements. They were organized, funded, and patient. We stopped them, not with drama, with discipline and detail. When I retired, my director Broder shook my hand and said, "Alex, the problem with men like you is that you never really stop." I laughed. I thought he was wrong. I planted tomatoes. Nora and I finally took that trip to Portugal she had been asking about since 2016. I slept 8 hours a night for the first time in decades. Then the phone rang on a Wednesday morning in October, and I realized Broder had been right all along. The man on the other end had called looking for a frightened retiree. Instead, he had dialed directly into 31 years of experience that had been waiting, without knowing it was waiting, for exactly this. Agent Harmon kept me on the phone for 40 minutes before I made my first move. 40 minutes of oh dear, and please slow down, I'm not good with computers. Every time I fumbled with a fake instruction, I could hear the patience thinning in his voice, replaced by something sharper. Greed has a sound. It sounds like a person trying very hard not to rush. While he talked, I was building the trap. Here is what a virtual machine is in plain language. Imagine you build a second fake house inside your living room. Same furniture, same layout, same family photos, but made entirely of cardboard. To someone looking through the window, it looks completely real. But nothing inside is connected to anything real. You can invite a stranger in, let them touch everything, let them think they are finding your valuables, and none of it matters, because the real house is somewhere they cannot see. That is what I built for Agent Harmon. A fake computer environment, sealed off from my real system, dressed up with a cluttered desktop and folders labeled Tax Returns 2022 and Bank Info, Important. I even added a sticky note on the wallpaper with a password written in bold. That was my favorite touch. Greedy people stop thinking clearly when they see a password left out in the open. It confirms everything they already believe about their victims. He walked me through downloading a remote access tool, the step where most victims lose everything. I downloaded it exactly as he asked. But I opened it inside the glass box, not my real machine. The moment he clicked connect, and his cursor appeared on my fake desktop, I felt something shift in my chest. Not excitement, something quieter. The stillness of a man who is trained for exactly this moment, and is now inside it. My second monitor lit up. The trace began. "I'm in now, Arthur," he said. "Don't touch anything. I'm going to fix this for you." "Thank you so much," I said. "You're a lifesaver." I meant it in a way he would not understand for a long time. 6 minutes. That is all it took to start pulling the layers back. While Agent Harmon clicked through my empty fake folders like a man who thought he was finding gold, I was running a quiet trace behind the curtain. His IP address was masked, 3 proxy layers, a VPN exit node in the Netherlands. Competent enough to fool most people. Not competent enough to fool me. I unwound it the way you untangle a knot. Not by pulling hard, but by finding the loose end and following it patiently. 11 minutes. The trail resolved to a commercial address in a mid-sized city in India. From there I used OSINT, open source intelligence, meaning public information that people leave scattered across the internet every day without realizing it. Most people have no idea how much of their life is just sitting out in the open. A name surfaced. Rajan. I found a deleted social media profile. Those ghost accounts leave traces if you know where to look. There was a photo. A young man, maybe 24, standing next to a modest car, wearing a pressed shirt, smiling the wide smile of someone who had just gotten something he worked for. I sat with that photo longer than I expected. Then I moved on, because something else had caught my eye. A shared drive folder that Agent Harmon had left open during the session. Inside it was a spreadsheet titled Leads, Active Q3. 512 rows. Each row was a human being. Name, age, estimated net worth, phone number, last contact date, and a status column, warm. In progress, transferred, closed. I scrolled to the bottom and counted the rows marked closed. 214. I saved everything, kept my voice perfectly steady, and asked Agent Harmon if he was almost done. "Almost there, Arthur," he said warmly. "Almost there. I want to be honest about what happened when I really looked at that spreadsheet. Not the technical part, the human part. I had been treating this like a professional exercise, a problem to solve. But sitting at my kitchen table at 10:43 in the morning with my coffee gone cold, I did the math. 214 closures. A conservative average of $15,000 each. I stopped calculating when the number hit $3.2 million because it became too heavy to sit with. I looked at the spreadsheet structure more carefully. The tagging system. The color-coded follow-up dates. The way leads were sorted by estimated net worth. This was not a messy amateur operation. This was a sales pipeline, optimized the way a legitimate business optimizes for profit. Whoever designed it had done this before, many times, and had gotten better at it. This was not Rajan's design. Rajan was an employee working someone else's system. I opened a document on my real machine and typed 2 words at the top. The architect. Then I walked to the printer, printed the entire spreadsheet, and cleared off the corkboard above my desk, the one Nora uses for grocery lists. I pinned the first page to the board. 511 more went into a folder beside it. 512 names. 512 people who had done nothing wrong except trust a voice on the phone. When Nora appeared in the doorway and saw the corkboard, she looked at it for a long moment without speaking. Then she looked at me. "How long?" she asked. "I don't know yet," I told her. She nodded once. Then she went and made a fresh pot of coffee. I was underwater for 3 days while I mapped the network above Rajan. That is Nora's word for how I get during long operations. Underwater. She means it kindly. The methodology is the same whether you are working for the government or alone at a kitchen table in Ohio. You follow the money. You follow the infrastructure. You follow the behavior. And you watch for the place where someone got lazy, because in every organization, someone always got lazy. Rajan was not alone. I identified 8 other operators running the same scripts from the same framework. Someone above them was managing everything. The spoofed phone numbers, the remote access tools, the cryptocurrency layer that turned stolen transfers into untraceable digital money. I traced it through cloud server registrations, domain purchase histories, and business filings across 2 countries. Then, buried in a registration record for a small IT consulting front, I found it. An email address reused across 3 separate fraudulent business registrations. A simple, catastrophic mistake made by someone managing too many things and trusting that nobody would look closely enough. I looked closely enough. The name behind that email took another day to confirm. Tarek Asker, 41 years old. A LinkedIn profile describing him as a digital business solutions consultant, with a professional headshot and 847 connections. He had never been publicly charged with anything. He had chosen his cover carefully and maintained it well. I stared at his headshot for a long time. A middle-aged man in a blue blazer, smiling with the easy confidence of someone who had been winning quietly for years. "I've met men like you before," I said to his photograph out loud in an empty room. "You just never knew I was there. I have taught one lesson more than any other in my career. Overconfidence is not a reward for getting good at something. It is the vulnerability that getting good creates. The day you stop checking your own judgment is the day you make the mistake." I had taught this. I had written it in memos. I had watched it happen to others. Then, on a Tuesday evening 3 weeks into my investigation, I made the mistake. It was small. One misconfigured setting in a VPN routing rule, caused by 4 hours of sleep and too much coffee, that exposed a real system identifier instead of a masked one for approximately 8 minutes. 8 minutes is almost nothing. In most contexts, nobody notices. But Tarek's operation had a basic detection layer that I had assessed as unsophisticated. I was mostly right. Mostly has no place in serious security work, and I had gotten comfortable enough to forget that. Someone on his infrastructure flagged the anomaly. They did not have my name or address. But they logged it and sent an alert, and somewhere in a city I had been studying for 3 weeks, a screen showed an unexpected blip. I caught my own mistake 20 minutes later. My stomach dropped in a way it had not in years. I shut everything down, wiped the logs, rotated every identifier I had been using. 40 minutes of careful work to close the window. When it was done, I sat in the dark and stared at the wall. I was 62 years old, alone, and if Tarek's people were better than I had estimated, they would soon be looking for a real person at a real address. Nora knocked on the door and asked if I had eaten. I had not. I picked up my phone and scrolled to a number I had not called in 6 years. Stellan Vox picked up on the second ring. People who spent careers in threat response always pick up fast, even years later, even at 10:30 at night. "Alex," he said. No surprise. I told him everything. 20 minutes without interruption. When I finished, there was a silence that felt like its own kind of answer. "Alex," he said finally, "you've committed at least 4 federal offenses." He listed them. Unauthorized access to a computer system. Interception of electronic communications. Accessing stored data without legal standing. The Honeypot itself was barely defensible because I had invited the connection to a system I owned. Everything beyond that moment was not defensible at all. I did not argue. He was completely right. "If this surfaces," he continued, "a former DoD engineer running a private operation against foreign nationals, the political story swallows the justice. It becomes about you instead of them." I had seen that happen before. The moment the method becomes the story, the crime disappears. "I have 512 names on my wall," I said. A long silence. "I know," Stellan said, and for the first time something human moved in his voice. "Stand down from the active collection. Stay offline. Let me see what I can do from my end." After I hung up, I sat with the phone in my hand for a while. Then I picked up a legal pad, uncapped a pen, and began writing a different plan. Not the satisfying one. The right one. The new plan was slower and harder, because it required me to put down what felt good and pick up what was actually useful. I rebuilt my entire evidence file from scratch, separating everything into 2 piles. The first pile held what was legally clean: the Honeypot session data, the packet analysis from my own machine, the OSINT work pulled from public records, the time-stamped recording of the original call, and the spreadsheet copied during a window when it was voluntarily accessible through a connection Agent Harmon himself had opened. The second pile I set aside without pretending it did not exist. It just was not going into any submission document. I called Oren Bast, a former colleague who now ran a private threat intelligence firm with proper licenses, to do the kind of network reconnaissance individuals cannot legally perform. He listened, asked 4 precise questions, and ran a parallel verification sweep using his firm's infrastructure. 5 days later, he came back with confirmation of everything I had found on Tarikasker, plus 3 additional pieces of evidence I could not have reached legally on my own. I spent 4 more days organizing everything into a 47-page submission document, structured to speak directly to what federal agencies need to see in the first 3 pages to take something seriously. Most external submissions fail not because the information is wrong, but because it is buried. I say all of this without drama, because that is how it deserves to be told. Real justice is paperwork and patience. The trap, the trace, the cursor on my fake desktop, that was theater. Good theater. But this document at 2 in the morning was the actual work. The morning I sent the package, I did not feel like someone who had won. I felt the quiet exhaustion of a person who has poured everything into a container and handed it to someone else to carry. I submitted to the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center at 9:17 a.m. A parallel package went to Interpol's Cybercrime Division through a channel Oren provided. A third went to a financial crimes unit with jurisdiction over 2 of Tarek's fraudulent company registrations. Each was formatted differently, because each agency has a different first filter for deciding what is worth their time. Then I closed the laptop, put on my garden gloves, and pulled weeds for 2 hours. The waiting was harder than the work. I am not a patient man by nature. The first week I checked news sources twice daily. The second week I forced myself to stop. I cooked dinner. I helped my granddaughter Petra, 12 years old, frighteningly sharp, with a school project on electrical circuits. I noticed she kept asking questions 3 layers deeper than the assignment required, which reminded me of myself at her age in a way that made my chest ache warmly. 3 weeks after sending the packages, Stellan called. Brief. Nothing official. But his voice was warmer, and he asked how I was sleeping. Better, I told him. Good, he said. Stay offline a little longer. That was all the confirmation I needed. Something was moving. I went back to the garden and tried very hard not to count the days. 6 weeks into the waiting, I opened the profile I had built on Rajan. I had looked at it before, always with the cold detachment of someone processing intelligence. Name, age, role, risk level. You look at a subject file as a variable, not a person. This time I looked at it differently. The city he grew up in had over 30% youth unemployment. His father had worked in a textile factory for 2 decades. His younger sister was in her 2nd year of a nursing degree. The deleted social media account, partially recovered from cache records, showed birthday dinners at modest restaurants, cricket commentary, a photo of Rajan holding a certificate from a community computer skills course, grinning. I sat with those fragments for a long time. I am not saying any of it made what he did acceptable. 214 people marked closed. Do not become less real because the man who helped rob them had a hard road. Life is full of people who face difficult choices and do not choose to hurt strangers. He chose poorly, and that matters. But I kept thinking about something a federal prosecutor said to me in 2011 during a case debrief. She said there is a difference between dismantling a criminal and dismantling the conditions that produce criminals. One solves a problem. The other solves a symptom. I wrote Rajan a message. Encrypted, untraceable, not threatening, not forgiving. It said, "You have 72 hours to contact the relevant authorities as a cooperative witness and give full information on the operation above you. This option disappears after that. Choose carefully." I sent it and sat back. Whether he walked through the door I had opened was entirely his decision. That felt right to me. Row 187. Her name was Edith Calloway. 71 years old. Retired schoolteacher from Columbus, Ohio. Status closed. Amount $31,000. I had passed her row many times. Just a number in a column. But one evening, a month after sending my submissions, I stopped on it and could not move on. $31,000. For a retired teacher, that was not just a number. That was likely decades of careful saving from a salary that was never large. A specific plan, security, small hopes, built quietly over 40 years in a classroom. I debated for 2 weeks whether to call her. In the end I did, because I felt I owed her at least this. The knowledge that someone had seen her name and had not looked away. She answered with a cautious hello that already expected bad news. I told her enough of the truth, that I had found evidence of the operation that took her money and had reported it to federal authorities. She was quiet. Then, "Why are you telling me this?" I said I thought she deserved to know. What followed was not the grateful conversation I might have imagined. Her anger was quiet and old, the kind that has been sitting in a chair for a long time. She asked why it took this long. She asked why the government with all its resources could not stop this before it reached her. She asked what good any of it did when the money was gone and not coming back. I had no clean answers. I told her she was right to ask. By the end of the call, something had shifted slightly. Not resolution. There is none available when $31,000 of someone's life is gone. But she said that knowing someone had been paying attention made the silence feel slightly less total. I hung up and sat alone in the study for a long time. Justice is not the same thing as repair. I have known that intellectually my whole career. That evening, I understood it in my body. I found out about the arrests through a news alert on my phone. Thursday morning. I was having breakfast. The headline read, "Multinational cybercrime ring dismantled in coordinated law enforcement operation." I put down my fork and read the article twice. A fraud operation across 7 countries. An estimated $4.2 million taken from victims over 18 months. Multiple front companies shut down. Digital infrastructure seized. 3 names mentioned. Tariq Isker was one of them. I read his name 3 times. Then I looked at the arrest photo, not the LinkedIn headshot in the blue blazer, but something taken under very different circumstances. He looked smaller than his professional profile had suggested. Tired, like a man who had believed for too long that the distance between himself and consequences was permanent. I texted Stellan one word, "Seen it." He replied 3 minutes later, "Good." That was all we needed to say. I did not celebrate. I sat at the kitchen table and thought about the 512 names on my wall, and what fraction of $4.2 million would actually be recovered, and how many of those people were waking up that same morning with no idea anything had changed. I thought about Rajan, whose name was not in the article. That absence told me the message had likely been received and a cooperation deal was quietly being built somewhere. I thought about Edith Calloway. I thought about Nora, who had rearranged months of our retirement around the corkboard and the cold coffee and the closed study door, and had never once asked me to stop. I rinsed my plate and walked out to the garden. The tomatoes needed attention. I gave them attention. It was enough. 3 months after the arrests, the calls started. Real ones. A journalist. A podcast producer. A retired police officer named Wadsworth who had heard about what happened through Stellan's network and wanted help training local departments on fraud recognition. I said no to the journalist and the podcast. I said yes to Wadsworth. And I said yes to a community center in Columbus that ran digital literacy programs for adults over 60. I chose Columbus deliberately. You understand why. 61 people in a public library meeting room. Most of them between 60 and 80. Some had brought notebooks. One man had brought his adult daughter, who sat beside him with her arms crossed. I could tell she had been trying to have this conversation with him for years. I did not lecture them. I told them the truth plainly. The people who run these operations are not stupid. They are organized. They know that someone who has spent 40 years carefully building a retirement fund carries a very specific fear. The fear of losing the thing they worked hardest to protect. That fear is a lever. It makes smart people do things they would never otherwise do. I told them how a spoof number works. I told them what the first 30 seconds of a scam call sounds like. I told them that urgency is a weapon. The entire design of these calls is built to make you react before you think, because if you pause and think, the script collapses. The one rule I live by, they need you to react. Your only job is to pause. I mentioned, near the end, that one person on the victim list I had encountered was a retired teacher from Columbus. I did not say her name. I said she had lost $31,000 and had asked me a question I thought about every day. Why couldn't the system stop this before it reached me? The honest answer is that the system has gaps. The best protection against those gaps is exactly what was sitting in that room right now. When the session ended, the man with his daughter was talking to her quietly. She had uncrossed her arms. And in the second row, a woman with silver hair who had not written a single note the entire time, but had not looked away from me once, came up after nearly everyone had left. She introduced herself. Her name was Edith Calloway. We shook hands. Neither of us said much. We did not need to. 8 months have passed since Agent Harmon first called. The garden is the best it has ever been. The corkboard came down 2 months ago. I unpinned every page, filed everything into a labeled binder, and put it on the study shelf. Nora covered the empty wall with a photograph of the two of us in Portugal. She hung it the day after I took the pages down, which tells me she had been waiting for exactly that moment. Petra visited last month. 12 years old, frighteningly precise, the kind of child who takes a concept you explain and immediately finds the edge of it. She found my old network architecture textbooks on the shelf and started asking questions I was genuinely glad to answer. We spent 3 evenings at the kitchen table with graph paper and colored pens while I showed her how systems talk to each other, where the gaps live, and why the gaps are where all the interesting problems are. Nora watched from the hallway on the 3rd evening and smiled in a way she did not think I noticed. I want to tell you something before I finish, because I think it matters more than anything else in this story. Tarek Asker's arrest did not end anything. The fraud industry did not pause when his operation was dismantled. Somewhere right now, another spreadsheet is being built. Another 500 names are being entered into another status column. Another young person who needed a better option and chose a terrible one is putting on a headset and reading from a script designed by someone they have never met. The people on that spreadsheet are real. They are your parents, your neighbors, your retired coworkers. They are Edith Calloway. And the system, even when it is working correctly, will not catch every call before it reaches them. What I did was not extraordinary. I need you to understand that. I had 31 years of specialized training and the very specific luck of having a skill set that matched this particular problem. You do not need any of that. You need the willingness to pause. You need to know what the first 30 seconds of one of these calls sounds like. You need to be willing to tell the people you love that hanging up is not rude. It is exactly the right thing to do. That morning in October, a man with a rehearsed voice tried to use my fear against me. He picked the wrong person. But the right person should not be the only line of defense. You are more prepared now than you were before you read this. Share it with someone who needs it. That is the only payoff I am asking for. My phone is on the table beside me as I write this. Early morning. Coffee in hand. Garden waiting outside the window. It buzzes. Unknown number. Foreign prefix. I look at it for a moment. Then I set down my coffee, straighten up in my chair, and answer. Good morning, I say in my calm, ordinary voice. This is Alex.